The clown we didn't own. I, 25 female, had this happen to me about 10 years ago, and even now I still don't like talking about it out loud. When I was 15, I used to babysit a lot for family, friends, and people my parents knew from work, mostly because I was reliable, lived nearby, and didn't mind staying late on weekends. This particular night was nothing unusual. I was babysitting for a couple my parents had known for years, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every house looked almost identical and nothing ever really happened. They had two young kids, both under the age of 7, and before they left, they gave me the usual instructions: the kids' bedtime, where the snacks were, and that I could help myself to anything in the fridge as long as I didn't make a mess. Everything felt completely normal at first. The kids went to bed without much trouble, and by around 9 o'clock the house was quiet. I remember sitting on the couch watching TV, scrolling on my phone, and honestly just waiting for the night to pass. At some point I decided to go upstairs to check on the kids, mostly out of habit, and that's when I noticed it. At the top of the stairs, in the hallway between the two bedrooms, there was a life-sized clown statue. It wasn't there earlier, I'm absolutely sure of that, because when I had put the kids up to bed, the hallway had been empty, except for a small table and a lamp. The clown was standing upright, dressed in a faded costume, with a white, painted smile and glassy eyes that reflected the light in a way that made it almost look alive. I remember freezing on the stairs, my heart suddenly racing, trying to convince myself that I must have just missed it before. I told myself it was probably some weird decoration the parents owned and forgot to mention. Still, it made me uncomfortable, especially because it was positioned directly between me and the kids' rooms. I avoided looking at its face for too long and quickly checked on the children, both of whom were asleep before going back downstairs. A couple of hours later, I went back upstairs again. This time, I noticed the clown had moved. It wasn't a huge change, just enough to be wrong. Its head seemed tilted slightly, and the expression on its face looked a little bit different somehow, like its smile was wider. And I remember standing there, staring at it, feeling a tight, crawling fear settle in my chest. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that, I was tired, and letting my imagination get the best of me. But the longer I stood there, the more convinced I became that it wasn't the same. So that's when I called the parents. I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking as I asked them if they could maybe tell me why they had a clown statue upstairs. It was just really creeping me out. There was a pause on the line, followed by the mother laughing softly, and said something that made my blood run cold. "What clown statue?" she asked. I remember asking her to stop joking, but she sounded genuinely confused. Then the father took the phone and told me very calmly that they did not own a clown statue and that I needed to get the kids and leave the house immediately. When I looked back into the hallway, the clown was gone. The space where it had been standing was empty, but the carpet beneath it was slightly flattened, like something heavy had been there for a long time. I grabbed the kids, didn't even bother with the coats, and ran to the neighbor's house across the street while the parents called the police. They never found anything. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, and no clown statue. This happened on March 13th, 2011, and I never babysat again. I thought it was one of the kids. This happened when I was around 16. I'm 26 now, and it still messes with my head whenever I think about it. I was babysitting for a single mother in an older house, the kind with narrow hallways and floors that creaked no matter how lightly you walked. She had 2 kids, both elementary school age, and they were already asleep by the time I arrived. She told me to just keep an ear out in case they woke up and to lock the doors before settling in for the night. Not long after she left, I started hearing noises upstairs. At first, it sounded like soft footsteps, slow and careful, like a child trying to not get caught out of bed. I assumed one of the kids had woken up and was wandering around, so I called out their names from the bottom of the stairs, and there was no answer. When I went upstairs, I was a little bit annoyed, and I checked on the kids, and they were both asleep in their beds, breathing steadily, exactly the way I left them. I felt a little silly for being nervous and went back downstairs. The noises started again about 20 minutes later. This time I heard what sounded like whispering, just faint enough that I couldn't make out words. I saw movement at the end of the hallway and felt relieved. Thinking one of the kids was just playing a joke or sleepwalking, I asked them what they were doing, but whoever it was didn't respond. When I turned on the hallway light, there was no one there. I checked the kids again. They were still asleep and still not moving. As the night went on, it only got worse. I kept seeing a small figure in my peripheral vision, standing just out of sight, and every time I looked directly at it, it was just gone. At one point, I swear, I saw someone standing at the foot of the stairs, just watching me. I told myself it was exhaustion. But then the breaking point came when I found handprints on the wall near the ceiling, smeared slightly, but far too high for either child to reach. I left as soon as the mother got home, and I never went back. The parents were still watching. I, 24 female, didn't realize how disturbing this was until years later when I stopped making excuses for it. I had been babysitting for a couple who lived in a large house on the edge of town. They were polite but oddly distant, and before they left, they told me that they'd be gone for several hours and that the kids should already be asleep. The house felt quiet in a way I couldn't explain, like it was holding its breath or something. Throughout the night, I kept feeling like I wasn't alone. I would catch movement in reflections, in the dark TV screen or the glass of framed pictures, but whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. What really unsettled me was how quickly the parents responded to my texts. Every message I sent was answered almost instantly, even late at night, which honestly felt strange. At one point, I heard footsteps upstairs, heavy ones, not like a child's. When I texted the parents about it, they replied, "Everything is fine, just keep watching the kids." Later, I realized something that made my stomach drop. Every time I moved, the sounds in the house seemed to mirror me. When I stood up, I heard movement upstairs. When I sat down, the house went quiet. I started to feel like I was being observed, studied even. I eventually discovered a partially open door at the end of the hallway that I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a dark room with nothing but a chair and a faint smell of sweat and dust. When the parents returned, they acted like nothing was wrong. I never heard from them again, but months later, I found out through a local forum that they had been reported for installing hidden cameras in their home. I still wonder how long they were watching me. I was asked not to look in the mirrors. I, 28 female, had this happen to me when I was 17. And at the time I thought it was just a strange request from overly cautious parents. But now, looking back, I realized it was the only warning I was ever given. I was babysitting for a family that lived in a newer house. The kind with clean lines, white walls, and mirrors everywhere. There was a large mirror in the entryway, mirrored closet doors in the hallway, and a full-length mirror at the end of the upstairs landing. It felt less like a home and more like a staged model house, but I didn't think much of it at first. Before the parents left, they went over the usual instructions: bedtime, snacks, and which rooms were off limits. Then, right as they were about to walk out the door, the mother stopped and said something that caught me off guard. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, her tone suddenly serious. "After the kids are asleep, please don't look into the mirrors." I laughed, assuming she was joking, but neither parent smiled. The father added very calmly that it was just a house rule and that everything would be fine as long as I followed it. I didn't want to push, so I agreed, even though the request didn't make any sense. The kids went to bed easily, and for a while the night was uneventful. I sat on the couch, scrolling on my phone, very aware of the mirror in the entryway reflecting the darkened living room behind me. Every time I shifted, I caught movement in the reflection and had to remind myself it was just me. After about an hour, I noticed something strange. Whenever I stood up, the reflections didn't feel quite right. Not wrong enough to immediately panic, but delayed, like they were just a fraction of a second behind. I tried not to think about it and sat back down, keeping my eyes forward. At one point, I needed to use the bathroom upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I made a conscious effort to keep my eyes down, focusing on the carpet instead of the mirror closet doors lining the hallway. I could feel the urge to look, like an itch behind my eyes, but I resisted it. When I came out of the bathroom, I heard one of the kids whisper my name. I turned towards their room, forgetting about the mirrors for just a moment, and in my peripheral vision, I saw movement in the full-length mirror at the end of the hall. Not my movement, something else. I snapped my eyes away immediately, my heart pounding, and hurried back downstairs. From that point on, the house felt different, heavier. Every mirror felt like a presence, something I had to completely avoid. I started noticing faint smudges on the glass, like handprints that had been wiped away but not completely erased. Around midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze. I listened. The steps moved slowly, deliberately, stopping near the mirrors. I texted the parents, asking if the kids had a habit of getting up at night, and they replied almost instantly, "Do not look, we're on our way back." The footsteps stopped. I stayed on the couch, staring at the floor until the parents returned. As they walked in, the mother glanced briefly at the entryway mirror and flinched, like she'd seen something she didn't want to acknowledge. I never babysat for them again, and to this day, I still avoid mirrors in unfamiliar houses. The kids knew my name before I arrived. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 18, and it's the reason I stopped taking last-minute babysitting jobs from people I didn't know personally. I had agreed to babysit for a family recommended through a local Facebook group, mostly because I needed the money, and the parents seemed normal enough over messages. They gave me the address, told me their kids' age, and said they'd be home late. Nothing stood out as strange. When I pulled into the driveway, I hadn't even gotten out of my car yet when the front door opened. 2 kids stood there, staring straight at me. Before I could introduce myself, the older one smiled and said my name. Not a nickname, not the babysitter, my full name. I remember hesitating, assuming the parents must have mentioned it to them, but the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. The younger one waved excitedly and repeated my name, laughing. Inside, the parents greeted me normally and acted like nothing was unusual. When I asked how the kids knew my name already, the mother shrugged and said, "They're very observant." The kids were well behaved, almost too much so. They followed every instruction perfectly and went to bed without complaint. As I tucked them in, the older one asked if I was still living near the old shopping center on the east side of town. I hadn't told anyone that. I brushed it off, telling myself, kids overhear things, but the feeling of unease stuck with me. Once they were asleep, I went downstairs and tried to relax, but every few minutes I heard faint whispering through the baby monitor, even though it wasn't pick up any sound from their rooms. Later, when I checked on them, both kids were awake, sitting up in bed, staring at the door like they'd been expecting me. The older one asked, very casually, if I remembered the last time I was there. I told him I'd never been to their house before. He frowned and said, "That's not what they told us." When I asked who they were, neither kid answered. They just laid back down and closed their eyes in unison, like the conversation was over. I tried calling the parents, but my calls went straight to voicemail. While I waited, I noticed something on the fridge. A piece of paper with a list of names written neatly in pen. Some were crossed out. My name was at the bottom. When the parents finally came home, I asked them about it. They told me it was nothing, just an old list, and paid me quickly, clearly eager for me to leave. I never found out how the kids knew so much about me, but I still wonder how many names were crossed off before mine was added. Alright everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you really enjoyed the stories. Some true scary stories this time, some shorter ones, but 5, so that's really nice. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.